Привет всем, с вами я, Janey, и это How Janey Learned Russian. We are in our fourth chapter in my book on Russian cases made slightly less scary. This is day 2 of the genitive case unit. So we've covered nominative case, prepositional case, and accusative case. And genitive, which is the most complicated of the cases, I've broken into the singulars and the plurals. So we are starting on the breakdown of genitive case singulars. Today, we are going to review the various instances, not all the instances, but the various instances that we need genitive case. So yesterday in the previous video, I introduced you to some example sentences that get genitive case, and you were supposed to come up with theories of what makes it need genitive case and what endings do the masculines get, what endings do the feminines get, etc. So if you haven't watched that video, go back and watch it. And then today I'm going to give you the answers and we're going to break it down. So real quick, just a quick reminder that this is all based on my textbook that's available for purchase over on my Patreon. The link is down below. Also, I will be having a verb textbook coming out very soon, talking about verbs of motion, verbal aspect, some different things that can sometimes be very complicated for people. So that will be available for purchase over on Patreon as well. Also, I offer group classes. They're very fun. Some students come twice a week. Some students come once a week. And it's great. It's at the beginning and intermediate levels. The intermediate levels, we do our classes based on films, Russian films. So it's very fun. And I highly recommend that as sort of your accountability partner in your Russian learning journey. So, наш интересный кусочек информации дня. Remember, our theme for our interesting tidbits this chapter are «Кого надо знать в русской истории?» Да, или в русской литературе. Каких людей, кого надо знать? А вот, я очень люблю, то есть это не люблю, я интересуюсь этим человеком. Это регент Sofia Alexeyevna. Okay, so many of you probably don't know necessarily who she is, but she was kind of one of the first female rulers of Russia, and she the way she came to be in power was kind of interesting. We'll talk about it in just a second, but she ended up, up until Sofia, most women were not educated. In fact, they were put off into what was called a terem. They were just kind of locked up and, saved for marriage. But she was actually allowed to be educated. She was very well educated. And in fact, in her short rule, she established the first institution of higher education in Russia, which was the Slavonic Greek Latin Academy, established in 1685. So that's pretty interesting. Вот это один интересный факт из ее жизни. So then when Alexei dies, then Fyodor dies, then there's kind of this scramble of who's going to be Tsar. Because all that was left over was either Pyotr I, who we later would know as Peter the Great, or Ivan V. And the problem was, they were from different mothers. So Pyotr was from the second wife, which the traditionalists really looked down on him becoming the Tsar. But the problem was Ivan V was kind of not the brightest bulb in the bunch. And so everybody was kind of worried. So what happened is Sofia, so technically they became like dual rulers. So you can kind of see them here on their throne, sitting on their thrones next to each other. So they kind of ruled next to each other. But because both of them, weren't quite mentally ready to be Tsar, they had Sofia be in the background telling them what to do. So technically, Sofia was the one calling the shots, but they were the face of the empire. So look, you can see this little window here. Sofia would sit back here and подсказывать. She would kind of like tell them, what to do. So what's interesting, like I said, they're very much puppets in the true sense of like, here are your tsars, they're men. But then eventually, obviously, I mean, if you know Russian history, the Streltsy kind of do this big uprising. Peter the Great becomes the Tsar and has Sofia sent to Novodevichy Monastery. Remember, I talked about that in one of my favorite places in Moscow. So she actually gets locked up, get thee to a nunnery. She gets sent to a nunnery and it becomes essentially a prison sentence. And that is where she dies. So she's a very interesting I think, an interesting person in Russian history. Also, I think there's a whole series on her in Russian. It used to be available on Amazon Prime, but I don't know where it is these days. But anyway, вот такие дела, вот интересный факт дня. Хорошо. Вот. So, yesterday I read you off these different sample sentences that are getting genitive case. And then I left it on a cliffhanger. And I said, okay, now come back tomorrow to find out if you figured out what prepositions need genitive case. And, most of you, these things are already on your radar. But let's really break it down, okay? So the number one important thing, I remember back in the days, back before Google Translate, I had an actual dictionary that I took to Russia my first time going to Russia. And I distinctly remember looking in the dictionary, because this is how me and my host mother would communicate. It was just like dictionary, and we'd just point to words. Anyway, so I remember looking up in the dictionary the word of, and there's no word for of in Russian. All it said was genitive case. I'm like, what? Huh? So there is no word for of in Russian. You have to put the thing that is of into genitive case. So you really need genitive case. Some other examples are after having. So you have already been exposed to having, but you're really just doing it with pronouns. У меня, у тебя, у нас, у вас. Well, this chapter you're going to learn how to put things into genitive case. У, for example, here are these example sentences. У моего брата. У моей сестры. Right? Yeah. So those are some examples of genitive case. All right. So having and to express of, also apostrophe S, right? Apostrophe S. Oh, and then look at this one. Also, if you say у моего друга, like вчера я спала дома у моего друга, that just means at my friend's house, at my friend's. Kind of like we would say that in English, just apostrophe S. I was at my friend's. Right. So if we just go ooh and then genitive case, it essentially means at their house. Right. Okay. Next one is with the preposition is. So it's very likely that you have memorized how to tell people where you are from. Right. So because one of the most common things somebody's going to ask you is откуда вы? And you probably have memorized я из Америки. Я из Англии. Я is. Well, that was all getting genitive case. That phrase that you memorized. Genitive case. So let's look at some examples in here. Он из маленького города. He's from a small town. That, or you might say something like я из не очень известного штата. Right? Maybe you're from a state that not very many people know. I had to say that all the time because back then nobody knew Utah. Like, now it's becoming more popular, but back then nobody knew Utah. So I would always say я из не очень известного штата, and then I would tell them как называется и так далее. Also, another usage. This one's super interesting because I remember being so confused. I was in Russia from 19 to about 21, and every time I tried to tell somebody how old I was, it kept changing. Мне 19 лет, мне 20 лет. Now suddenly it's 21 год. Now suddenly it's 22 года, right? So I was right there when it was like super confusing. So we will talk about that in this chapter, about what's happening with 2, 3, 4 and genitive singular. Also, this is super interesting when you don't have something. So we've talked about having. The thing you have gets nominative case, but the thing you don't have gets genitive because you're literally saying, there is none of that by me. There is none of a car, not even the windows. Like there's no part of a car near me. So there's none of it. So there's kind of an invisible of in there if you want to think of it like that. Another usage is with the preposition от. This comes in really handy when we're talking about north of, south of, or it's on the right of, it's located on the left of my door, etc. Things like that. So от always gets genitive case. Okay, and then this one I kind of touched upon it in the accusative case. I mentioned, and remember we had this beautiful little flow chart that if it is an animate object and it's not feminine singular, it's going to get genitive case. Animate object means it has been alive at some point in time. Okay, so for example, я очень люблю и уважаю моего старшего брата. Now, if I was going to say the same thing about my sister, then we go back to accusative case. Я очень люблю мою старшую сестру. But because it's a masculine animate, we now go into genitive case. So you can see genitive is just so important. There's so many things that I know you want to say that you need genitive for. Oh, look at this one. Я знаю друга. I know the friend. And then we're going into a possessive of your grandma, which puts us into genitive again. It's crazy. You'll get like multiple genitives all back to back to back to back. Okay. So with those things in mind, let's go through and read these sentences and just say, okay, that's an example of blah, blah. That's an example of blah, blah. Okay. So у моего брата есть жена. What's happening here? This is a having. This is a having. The person that has it gets genitive case. У моего брата. Look at what's happening to those masculines. Мой брат becomes моего брата. Okay, now let's look at a feminine, because now we're talking about a sister. У моей сестры нет, there is none of, мужа. У моей сестры нет мужа. So we have multiple genitive cases happening. We have a having, у моей сестры, and then we have a none of. There is no husband. Yeah? Нет мужа. She doesn't have a husband. Вот. Okay, next one. How would we translate this sentence? Это комната нашей мамы. In normal English, how would we translate this sentence? We would not use an of. That would sound awkward in English. This is the room of my mother. No, we don't talk like that. We would say, this is my mom's, apostrophe S, room. This is my mom's room. Okay? So, это комната нашей мамы. But in order to know where to put the genitive case, I like to have you put it into an of in your head. Okay? Номер 4. В этой комнате нет лампы, но есть 3 больших окна. Ooh, look at that. Ugh. That's getting a genitive plural adjective, which is super weird, which happens with our 2, 3, 4s. Next one. Okay, so notice we're getting нет лампы. There is no lamp, right? And then because we have the number 3, we're getting genitive case after that. Следующий. Украина находится на западе от России. It's located west of Russia. Okay, so we don't use an of, like our English of, we use от. We need to say от. Okay, because if you just went на западе России, you're going to piss a lot of people off because you just said Ukraine is in the south or is in the west of Russia. And you're like, what? Ukraine's its own country, you know. So that от is very important when talking about, you know, north, south, east, west, because it can really change the meaning. Номер 6. Мой самый любимый роман Толстого Anna Karenina. Okay, so that would be something like my favorite novel of Tolstoy, right? My favorite novel of Tolstoy is Anna Karenina. Next one. У меня 2 сына и 1 дочь. Okay, so у меня is getting genitive case. And then 2 forces genitive singular. 2 сына. Isn't that so weird? Like, that does not look plural at all. Сына, that's not plural. But that's because 2, 3, 4 forces genitive singular. Next. Вчера я спала дома у моего друга. That's the one we talked about, at somebody's house. Он из маленького города. Let's come down here to this one. Мой папа работает в Министерстве украинской культуры. Okay, what is this the ministry of? It's the ministry of Ukrainian culture. Вот. У нас есть 4, 2, 3, 4 урока во вторник. And again, this one is just so weird because that just does not look plural to us. And remember when we were doing nominative case and I was like, resist the urge to tell me numbers. You know, when I was teaching you plural, I was like, don't tell me numbers, don't tell me numbers. It screws everything up. Don't tell me how many dogs you have. No, just don't do it. It screws everything up. So this is why, because numbers, with the exception of 1, are going to get genitive case. Okay? Next, во вторник. Okay. В моем городе нет снега. Okay, so снег, we don't have snow. That's not true. Right now we actually had snow and school was canceled for like over a week. It was awful. Всегда жарко. Но в некоторых штатах, во Флориде, в Калифорнии, ну, на юге Калифорнии, нет снега. Да, в Аризоне нет снега. Ну, в некоторых местах. В Техасе редко есть снег. Вот. Next one, we talked about when it would normally be accusative, but it's a masculine animate, it now becomes genitive. Я знаю друга. And then we're wanting to say, I know your grandma's, apostrophe S, friend. So we have to make this go backward. I know the friend of your grandma. And then that tells us where to put the genitive case to convey of, okay? So, в русском языке нет такого слова privacy. Да, это точно, right? That's a real thing. We all kind of laugh about it. The Russian language doesn't have the word privacy and like the concept of like, hey, I just need some privacy right now. Like that's a very American mentality. Okay, what? So now let's talk about finding the invisible of. You're going to see it everywhere. Okay, so let's find the invisible of in some of these. Сергей Королёв, отец советской космонавтики. Okay, so what is he the father of? What is he the father of? Notice there is no of. There is no of. But what we're doing is we're looking for genitive case, and then we go, oh, because отец, that's the original form. That's just a nominative case. So there's no of. We're not saying anything of the father. We are saying father of Soviet cosmonautics. I don't even know how to say that in English. Okay, let's look at this one. This one's got what we call a chain of genitive, multiple ofs happening in here. Государственный музей истории Санкт-Петербурга. Okay, какой музей? What is this a museum of? Музей истории. Okay, so it's a museum of the history. The history of what? Санкт-Петербурга. Санкт-Петербурга. Музей истории Санкт-Петербурга. Again, notice there's no of. It is up to us to look. Музей is not in genitive case. That is just a nominative. So it's not saying of the museum, right? But история is in genitive case and Санкт-Петербурга is in genitive case. So it's of the history of St. Petersburg. Okay, let's look at some more. Министерство обороны Российской Федерации. We have two ofs in here happening again. So the Ministry of, you may not know this word, that's okay. Defense of what country? Российской Федерации. So the Ministry of Defense of the Russian Federation. Вот так, okay? Банк. Банк Москвы. Банк Москвы. Now, it's so funny to look at these because we think back for the feminines, we've seen these endings before in plural. So it can sometimes mess with our brains and be like, wait, multiple Moscows? No, that is strictly a feminine in genitive case. And that makes sense because it's the Bank of Moscow. The Bank of Moscow. Okay, let's look at this one here. Высшая школа экономики. Высшая школа экономики. Okay, so высшая школа, that looks nominative. This is why it was so important to learn nominative first, because it helps us to understand what's happening in a sentence when we know the original form of things. So the original form of economics is ekonomika. So this is the higher school of economics. Высшая школа экономики. Высшая школа экономики. Then Национальный исследовательский университет. That's all in nominative case. So there's no of happening down there. Okay? Вот. Хорошо. So we're going to review now at the end of all of this and I want you to figure out which of these phenomena do not require genitive case. Which of these phenomena do not require genitive case? Okay. Ooh. Does ooh require genitive case? Yes, it does. It can mean having. У моего брата есть много детей. У меня есть 2 сына. It can also mean at somebody's house. Я спала у моей подруги. I slept at my friend's house. Вот так. Okay? Is always gets genitive case, and it is one of the many ways of saying from, right? Я из не очень известного штата, который называется Юта. Я из маленького города, это небольшой город, даже не город. Русские посчитают, что это типа село даже. Okay? Numbers. Okay, this one's tricky. I didn't specify. Did I? So if you were really smart, you'd say, well, Janey, excuse me, teacher, not all numbers, because numbers ending in 1, 21, 101, 1,000,001, 1, they just get good old-fashioned nominative case. Everything else gets genitive case. Okay? Next one. Of. Yep. Remember my little memory of looking up in my cute little dictionary that I took with me to Russia in 2003? And I was trying to communicate with my babushka. And I looked it up and I looked up of, and it just said genitive case. I'm like, what the? I don't even know what that is. So yes, of needs genitive case. There is no word for of in Russian. Вот. Na. Does na get genitive case? Нет. Na gets either, let me hear it, prepositional case or accusative case, depending on whether it's a destination or location. Okay. Last one is when you have something, the thing you have, does it get genitive case? No. The thing you have gets nominative case. The person or thing having it gets genitive case. And then it gets genitive case if you don't have it. Okay? Хорошо. So that was just a good little review. In the next lesson, we will start breaking down the endings and bringing all of this to life in context, drilling, practicing. It's the, in the PCP, perceive, comprehend, produce, it's the comprehend/concentrate part. So get ready, put your little thinking caps on and get ready to work in the next video. Хорошо. Это все на сегодня. Увидимся на следующем уроке. До следующего урока. Пока-пока.